की जय। जय विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजक आचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्री श्रीमद् भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवसरि गौर भक्तवृंद की। श्रीमद् भागवतम की। All glories to the Son of the Lord, Hare Krishna. All glories to the Son of the Lord, Hare Krishna. All glories to the Son of the Lord, Hare Krishna. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Ram. All glories to Shri Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Okay, so we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 6, Text 36.
Yes.
Go to the word for word. Tata.
Tata.
Therefore.
Therefore.
Api. Api.
Api.
Kirtayami.
Kirtayani.
Anga.
Anga.
Yatha.
Yatha.
Mati.
Mati.
Yatha.
Yatha.
Shrutam.
Shrutam.
Kirtin.
Kirtin.
Hare.
Hare.
Sam.
Sam.
Satkartum.
Satkartum.
Giram.
Giram.
Anyabhida.
Anyabhida.
Asatim.
Asatim.
Tathapi kirtayami anga.
Tatapi kirtayamyanga.
Tathapi kirtayami anga.
Tatapi kirtayamyanga.
Yathamati yathashrutam.
Yatamati yadashrutam.
Yathamati yathashrutam.
Yatamati yadashrutam.
Kirtim Hare Swam Satkartam.
Kirtin Hare Swam Satkartum.
Kirtim Hare Swam Satkartam.
Kirtin Hare Swam Satkartum.
Giram Anyabhida Satim.
Giram Anyabhida Satim.
Giram Anyabhida Satim.
Giram Anyabhida Satim.
Tathapi kirtayami anga.
Tatapi kirtayamyanga.
Yathamati yathashrutam.
Yatamati yadashrutam.
Kirtim Hare Swam Satkartam.
Kirtin Hare Swam Satkartum.
Giram Anyabhida Satim.
Giram Anyabhida Satim.
Tathapi kirtayami anga.
Tatapi kirtayamyanga.
Yathamati yathashrutam.
Yatamati yadashrutam.
Kirtim Hare Swam Satkartam.
Kirtin Hare Swam Satkartum.
Giram Anyabhida Satim.
Giram Anyabhida Satim. Tatapi Yathamati yadashrutam.
Shrutam.
Kirtim Hare Swam Satkartum. Giram Anyabhida Satim.
Giram Anyabhida Satim. Tathapi kirtayami anga. Yathamati yathashrutam. Kirtim Hare Swam Satkartam. Giram Anyabhida Satim. Tathapi kirtayami anga. Yathamati yathashrutam. Kirtim Hare Swam Satkartam. Gananyabhida Satim. Tathapi kirtayami anga. Tathapi kirtayami satam.
Giram Anyabhida Satim.
Mataji's. Tathapi kirtayami anga. Yathamati yathashtam. Kirtim Hare Swam Satkartam. Giram Anyabhida Satim. Tathapi kirtayam yanga. Tathapi kirtam. Kirtim hare swam satkartam. Giram manyabhita satim. Tatha, therefore, api, although it is so, kirtayami, I do describe, anga, o vidura, yatha, as much as, mati, intelligence, yatha, as much as, shrutam, heard, kirtim, glories, harehe, of the Lord, swam, own, satkartam, just to purify, giram, speeches, anyabhitha, otherwise, asatim, unchaste. Translation: in spite of my inability, whatever I have been able to hear from the spiritual master and whatever I could assimilate, I am now describing in glorification of the Lord by pure speech, for otherwise my power of speaking would remain unchaste. Purport: the purification of the conditioned soul necessitates purification of his consciousness. By the presence of consciousness, the presence of the transcendental soul is verified, and as soon as consciousness leaves the body, the material body is not active. Consciousness is perceived, therefore, by activities. The theory put forward by empiric philosophers that consciousness can remain in an inactive state is the proof of their poor fund of knowledge. One should not become unchaste by stopping the activities of pure consciousness. If the activities of pure consciousness are stopped, certainly the conscious living force will be otherwise engaged, because unless engaged, the consciousness has no standing. Consciousness cannot be silent even for a moment. When the body does not act, the consciousness acts in the form of dreams. Unconsciousness is artificial. By induced extraneous help, it remains for a limited time or limited period, but when the intoxication of the drug is finished or when one is awake, the consciousness again acts earnestly. Maitreya's statement is that in order to avoid unchaste conscious activities, he was trying to describe the unlimited glories of the Lord, although he did not have the ability to describe them perfectly. This glorification of the Lord is not a product of research, but the result of hearing submissively from the authority of the spiritual master. It is also not possible to repeat all that one has heard from his spiritual master, but one can narrate as far as possible by one's honest endeavor. It does not matter whether the Lord's glories are fully explained or not. One must attempt to engage one's bodily, mental, and verbal activities in the transcendental glorification of the Lord. Otherwise, such activities will remain unchaste and impure. The existence of the conditioned soul can be purified only by the method of engaging mind and speech in the service of the Lord. The Tridandi Sannyasi of the Vaishnava school accepts three rods representing the vow to engage in the service of the Lord with body, mind, and speech, whereas the Ekadandi Sannyasi takes the vow to become one with the Lord. Since the Lord is the Absolute, there is no distinction between him and his glories. The glories of the Lord as chanted by the Vaishnava Sannyasi are as substantial as the Lord himself, and thus while glorifying the Lord, the devotee becomes one with him in transcendental interest, although he remains eternally a transcendental servitor. This simultaneously one and different position of the devotee makes him eternally purified, and thus his life becomes a complete success. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshulamanitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamahyam Darati Shvapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yatahparakam Lam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Scha Shri Rupam Sagarajatam Sahagana Rakanatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sarvetam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shivashankan Vitam Scha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dhinabhanto Jagatpate Gopasha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vershabhani Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpataruryascha Kripasindhu Vihevacha Patitanam Pavane Pyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Parishtaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vikasa Swaminiti Namane Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Parishtaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Viranta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschacha Deshacharini Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Radhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Virinda Nija Sukamati Shunyo Yohara Nyasta Sarva Kurtapuva Nama Mandangina Krishna Panena. I am a Prataka Vitya Dhyana Yukto Virakto Bhavijayati Vikaso Bhakti Puravo Yatindra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Tathapi Kirtayam Yanga, Yatamati Yatashtam, Kirtim Hare Swam Satkartam Giram Manyabhita Satim. In spite of my inability, whatever I've been able to hear from the spiritual master and whatever I could assimilate, I am now describing in glorification of the Lord by pure speech, for otherwise my power of speaking would remain unchaste. So, just from the first sentence, Prabhupada essentially makes a point that this purification of one's existence is the key to essentially becoming free from miseries. And it's because of our long-standing contamination and association with the modes of material nature that we falsely identify with this body and this world under the conception of what is ours, of me and mine, even though we actually own nothing at all. So we can't actually come out of this and attain the ultimately pure devotional service unless one actually purifies the consciousness, if you will. So it's excuse me. You could say that a lot of people end up finding that they're suffering and they want to get free from this, but the thing is that they don't know any higher engagement to actually get free from their miseries. So we have to find a way ultimately to not foster this material desire. There's a quote I wanted to bring up. You don't have to pull it up, I'll just say it. But this purification of the self comes from association as well. So satam prasangam mama virya samvida, this side. Understanding that by association with the pure devotees and hearing Krishna Katha, bhavanti hart karna rasayanath kataha, is pleasing to both the ear and to the heart. And through this transcendental sound vibration, one becomes purified, ultimately. It's by the cultivation of knowledge that one progresses on this path of liberation and essentially can become fixed in their devotional services. Tajosanaradasva abhavarga vartamani shaddha bhaktir bhaktir anukramishati. So this essentially is the way. I wanted to, can we pull up Canto 2, Chapter 3, Text 24? This was one of my favorite purports. I'll read the sentence again. The purification of the conditioned soul necessitates purification of its consciousness. So this whole process is ultimately cleansing the heart. And if you go to the second paragraph, it starts with the whole process, I believe. Yeah, so the whole process of spiritual culture is aimed at changing the heart of the living being in the matter of his eternal relation with the Supreme Lord as subordinate servant, which is his eternal constitutional position. So with the progress of devotional service, the reaction of change in the heart is exhibited by gradual detachment from the sense of material enjoyment, by a false sense of lording it over the world, and an increase in the attitude of rendering loving service to the Lord. Excuse me. So this is ultimately what the Christians can't seem to really wrap their head around. The whole conception that they have is that God is all good and sin actually comes from us. You ask them essentially, but everything comes from God, and they'll agree. But then when you bring up sin and things that of which might be unfavorable, they say, no, this essentially comes from us. So the understanding that we have to actually actively purify ourselves by loving and serving the Lord, not just one day of the week or whenever you're struggling and maybe want some freedom from material suffering, but actually engaging, as it says in the purport, body, mind, and speech 24/7 And in serving the Lord, this isn't unfortunately there in the philosophy, and I'm not saying this to falsely criticize them, but it's just not present. And you see this so much in the misconceptions. Like so many of us, if we've gone on books and you have a conversation with a Christian, I was at the airport and I talked to one lady. She was in the smoking section, and she was interested in hearing about the books and essentially what it was that we were trying to share. And when I told her that we should live our lives completely and totally on the mercy of God, if you will, and not try to live and enjoy his creation separate from him, she agreed. But when it comes to this, how do I put it? There was something that she said. Ultimately, in essence, she was basically saying that we can try, but this world is full of sin, and we can't get out of it. So we just have to rely on the mercy of Jesus Christ. And there doesn't really need to be any sort of work there's nothing you can do. It's just you just have to rely on God and pray to him, and everything will essentially be taken care of. And I told her, I'm like, well, I mean, how is this practically working for you? I mean, you're in here with a cigarette in your hand, like talking about how essentially, this is bad, I know it's bad, but I pray to God. I'm like, okay, you pray to God and you say that you love him, but love is something that can be talked about, but love is proven and shown by exhibition, if you will, by action. So I'm like, what's symptomatic of your love for God? I'm like, how hard are you really trying essentially to get free from this material desire, from this attachment? And they don't have the process, and that's the problem. So Maharaj actually made this point in a lecture. They have this prayer. We've heard it probably referenced before, or if you have a Christian background like myself, give us today our daily bread. It's like, if you have so much faith in God, why do you have to ask him that he'll feed you today? Ultimately, it's like why will God not provide for you? So they have this conception of God's mercy, but they don't seem to think that that God will provide ultimately, that Krishna will provide. So it's really a lack of faith that they actually exhibit, and largely this stems from this lack of knowledge which they have about the self and our relationship to God, or to Krishna, if you will. This knowledge of the self isn't present there. It's not present in institutions and philosophy and science. You see, it says, or Prabhupada makes the point that the presence of the transcendental soul is verified, and as soon as consciousness leaves the body, the material body is not active. Science is studied down to the T, like how the heart functions, how the mind functions, essentially all these neurons and blood cells, and how these things are transporting and moving all throughout the body, but they can't seem to understand why these things are functioning in this way. They've seemed to maybe understand how, but the reason behind this isn't there. And it's ultimately because they don't have the conception that the soul and the super soul, of course, are what gives the body life, and that actually allows it to engage in activity in this world. So their process for finding knowledge is completely and totally limited to pratyaksha, or their direct perception, how they can try to understand the world through their direct senses. And they have this, everybody will tell you that I know that humans make mistakes, or that we're imperfect, but what they don't also consider is that because we're imperfect and our senses are imperfect, everything that of which we can try to figure out by our own endeavor through those imperfect senses will also naturally be imperfect as well. But that consideration isn't there. So I'm not going to get into like pramana tattva, but essentially you can't direct like your direct perception. You can't divorce pratyaksha, or direct perception, from understanding of the world, but we can't rely solely on it. we have to always connect it back to essentially to Shabda or from proper authority, if you will. Can you pull up, by the way, Canto 11, chapter 28, verse 9? No, it's Praman, I don't remember exactly. Yeah, it's
27.
No, that's right, 9. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Pratyakshena numanena nigamenatma sangbida adhyantava rasajnyatva nisango vicharediha. So if you go to the translation, it reads, by direct perception, logical deduction, scriptural testimony. And scriptural testimony essentially is key. And personal realization, one should know that this world has a beginning and an end, so is not the ultimate reality. Thus, one should live in this world without attachment. So there was a really interesting discussion between Prabhupada and I think Dr. Gregory Benford. He's a physics professor. And they were discussing this consciousness, essentially. I'm going to pull it up. Forgive me, I should have had it up. And Prabhupada is essentially making the point that it's like, you're studying God's creation, you're studying it separate from Krishna, so your understanding is always going to be limited. Dr. Benford, he said, as far as I can see, the universe is a thing. No, I'm sorry, I'm reading right here. Dr. Benford said, but I feel that if I study the world, there's a way to check my conclusions. You study the world and you think that you understand the physical process and then perform experiments. You verify your ideas and then you see if you can apply the physical process to the world, or physical process in the world. And Prabhupada responds that this is another ignorance because you do not know that you're imperfect. And Dr. Benford then says, I know that I'm imperfect. Or that I know that I'm not perfect. And Prabhupada responds, he's like, well, then what is the use of your researching in this way? If you are imperfect, then results will also be imperfect. And Benford agrees, he says it's true. And Prabhupada says, so why do you waste your time this way? So Benford then says, he's like, well, there doesn't seem to be any other way of finding knowledge. So this is the problem. They don't have any, they don't accept the Vedas on authority, so they try to sit here and figure everything out by their own mental speculation. They get completely bewildered by it, but they don't know of anything higher, so they're kind of forced to just continue on in this way, even though knowing that practically it doesn't really give them a better understanding for how to live life in the world. Like, I talked to an atheist at I think it was the Dragon Con for far too long, but I entertained their conversation anyway, and they were saying how everything is chemicals and there's no soul. But I was like, okay, so why do you cry essentially if you have a family member who dies? Why do people lament when their car gets trashed to pieces? I'm like, at the end of the day, it's the same atoms out of which were previously there. So what's the whole difference? I mean, why lament at all? And Krishna makes this point in multiple different ways throughout chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita when he's speaking to Arjuna, telling him that he has no reason to lament. He says it in so many different ways. It's natam sochitam arhasi, nainam sochitam arhasi, saying essentially like whether you have this, I think it's the Vaibhasika, the Vaibhasikas essentially have this philosophy. It's very similar to the scientists that essentially the soul is, if there is a soul, then it's born along with the body, and when the body leaves, essentially, it also dies. He believes like even if you have this philosophy, it's like there's still no reason to lament. So people have these mixed conceptions that they view the world through, but it practically makes no sense, and it's very easy, unfortunately, to kind of point out these errors in their logic. So Prabhupada ultimately makes the point that when one understands the self, you can understand all of the things. So there's no need to sit here and try to individually endeavor. I mean, like the ultimate object of Dr. Benford's study was like grass. He was literally like studying like blades of grass. And he was saying that by understanding like this grass, we can actually like make this endeavor here and understand cells. And Prabhupada's just like, I mean, like then your understanding will be limited to grass. Because he's like, well, you say that Krishna is everything. He's like, Krishna is everything. But if you sit here and study grass, your understanding will simply be of the grass. And you can write volumes on these books. I mean, but you'll have grass at the end of the day. It's not like you're gonna like make some crazy advancement. So this is ultimately the problem with people who have a poor fund of knowledge, is that they don't have a conception of anything higher, which is ultimately why distribution of these books is so important. But this knowledge that of which people are searching after and what they think they're accumulating is actually is none other than ignorance. I think there's Isho 9. It's Antam Tamaf Perfechanti. I don't remember the full. Ye Vidyam Upasate. Tata Buya Ivate Tamo. What's the last line? There it is. So this, yeah, I gotta go back through it too. But essentially, those who engage in the culture of Nishan activities shall enter into the darkest region of ignorance. And worse than those still are those engaged in the culture of so-called knowledge. So this is that very class of men that we're describing right here. I mean, it's ultimately all ignorance, because they're not arriving at the conclusion that we're actually meant to serve Krishna. I mean, they're kind of on this mental trip and trying to figure things out for themselves, and it doesn't actually really get them much of anywhere. So in order to actually come to proper knowledge, one must hear, and one must not also hear nonsense. That's a big key. It doesn't mean we should subscribe to like the complete cessation of like hearing and like thinking that being deaf is better, or we ultimately have to hear transcendental sound vibration, but we have to hear from the proper authority. And there's many subject matters for hearing. This is stated just in the beginning of Canto 2. It's Shota Vyadini Rajendra Narinam Santi Sahasrashaha Apashatam Atmatattvam Griheshu Grihamedinam. So for those who are engrossed in material activities, ultimately there's many subject matters for hearing, but they're blind to the ultimate truth. They can't attain to this higher goal, if you will, of life. And because of that, they waste their human form, and they neglect the responsibility that ultimately comes with attaining this human form of life. There's another, I do remember this one. It's Asuriya Namate Loka Andina Tamasavrataha Tangse Pratyabhikajanti Yeka Chatma Hono Janaha. So these are killers of the soul, ultimately. And because of that, they have to enter into the plans of ignorance. The situation is unfortunate. This is the Buddhists or some people will, if we meet some like pseudo spiritualists, sometimes they'll talk about, yeah, I just got back from this retreat. I was on a silent retreat, and they were like not speaking for like 2 weeks, and like it was like the greatest thing ever, and like I was like super detached, and I wasn't engaged in like so many activities that of which like I was trying to get away from, like maybe it's a stressful job or doing drugs of some sort. I'm like, okay, so what are you doing now? The back of their job, and they're back smoking, they're drinking again. Or like even like you see like Buddhists, like some Buddhist monks who maybe, again, like maybe they do take their practice more seriously. You see them in the airport, they're smoking too. So it's like, so what happened to your detachment essentially that you were so-called cultivating? It's not there. It's just because you go into a solitary place and you maybe like close your eyes, meditate. I know what's the one hand clapping or whatever nonsense. If you come back and you don't rectify if there's no changing essentially of the attraction to material, it's always still going to be there. People will sometimes say, like at least like people who smoke weed, for example, like, oh, you never stop, you never quit, you just take breaks. And this is ultimately like everybody's situation who's attracted to these sort of activities, because they don't have a conception of essentially something higher. So you look at Maitreya, for example. The best way to abstain from engaging in these lower activities is to glorify the Supreme Lord, essentially, and not be unchaste with the senses out of which He gave us. So it reads, Maitreya's statement is that in order to avoid unchaste conscious activities, he was trying to describe the unlimited glories of the Lord, although he did not have the ability to describe them perfectly. So His glories are unlimited, and that doesn't mean we should essentially stop in trying to hear of them or describe them. Just as like ultimately we are powerless. We can't do anything on our own, but that doesn't mean that we stop trying to essentially please Krishna, which is what the Christians can't seem to understand. It's just like, oh, this is Satan's world. I can't do anything. I just need, God's mercy. But mercy comes through instruction, and we should understand that. It's not like there's gonna be some shining lights and like someone's gonna descend and just like lift you out of like your situation. Like there has to be the understanding that the mercy comes from essentially giving us a process by which we can get out of this suffering, if you will. So another point I wanted to touch on is essentially if you look at the hippies, for example, before like Prabhupada came, they didn't exactly like fit into this category, I guess, of people who were like wealthy and like money hungry. They weren't necessarily well off per se, so they might not be like the envious householders that are like described in the beginning of Canto 2. But they were they're focused on like they're on the platform of feeling, if you will, feeling good. And they kind of, I want to say, like, we're in this search for truth or something higher, because they at least have to understand that, like, this isn't a proper way to live. But if you look, in the purport it says that when the this is, I think, towards the bottom of the first paragraph, that when the intoxication of the drug is finished, or when one is awake and the consciousness again acts earnestly. If you pull up, can you pull up Canto 2, Chapter 1, Verse 3. I'm just going to read the translation. Let's see. So the lifetime of such envious householders pass the night either in sleeping or in sex indulgence, or in the daytime either in making money or maintaining family members. You go to the next one. Persons devoid of Atma Tattva do not inquire into the problems of life, being too attached to the fallible soldiers like body, children, and wife. Although sufficiently experienced, they still do not see their inevitable destruction. So, in one sense, I guess, like the hippies, they weren't so obsessed with making money, but they were still completely and totally immersed in sense gratification, which is also still very problematic. And they didn't actually really arrive at a conclusion of how to fix their problems ultimately in life. They were able to see that there's problems in society, but essentially you can get high and try to forget about them. But they'll still be there. So even though institution didn't give a proper way to live, and they prided themselves on this search for truth, they couldn't divorce their search for truth from gratifying their senses, and that was their ultimate problem. And Maharaj made this point in a lecture. I think it was George Harrison, who I think later he went back and essentially he felt he wished that he hadn't prescribed or been supportive of the usage of drugs, because if you look at like what essentially this path leads to, where you're trying to like enjoy but also get a conception of something higher, it ultimately all just goes towards sense gratification at the end of the day. And this is always what it devolves into, and you essentially become so engrossed and you don't know how to come out of that. So I'll also read, there's the third verse actually of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's Dushtaman or Vaishnav K. It reads, Tamara kanaka bhogara janaka, kanakera dvare sevaha madava, kamanira kama naha tavedam, tara malika kevala yadava. So when you claim wealth as your own, it creates in you everlasting desires for material enjoyment. Your riches should be used for serving Madhava, the Lord of all wealth. But on the flip side, he also says that neither is it your proper place to indulge in lust for women, whose only true proprietor is Lord Yadava. So whether one's more worried about making money and having some sort of economic development, or finding enjoyment in drugs and women, ultimately both are still wrong. Everything essentially should be for pleasing the Supreme Lord. So this is the highest engagement, if you will. There's a glorification of Krishna, and that's done through the medium of the spiritual master. This is Guru Mukha Padmavakya Chitita Kariya Aikya. and I don't know Korea. I don't know. Yeah, Manayash. I don't know how I'm forgetting that, but this is wanting to not subscribe to, I guess, the desires of the mind and the heart, but making the Guru's words one with our heart, and following his instruction. This is where real mercy comes from. Because the spiritual master, he gives us instruction, he engages us in a manner by which we can come to know Krishna, and by which we can become free essentially from our material desire. And this is essentially that purification that of which is needed. Just stopping one's activities without taking to a higher engagement, one will always just come back to what they might have been doing previously. And we see this like so many times, you know. And people especially would ascribe this, for example, on books. And some of the instances that I name, but I'm sure people have met others, for example, that will say that they're trying to stop drinking or smoking or doing some sort of activity. But essentially, if we don't know anything higher, you're always going to have to come back to that. So we have to live our lives ultimately in a way that is so that we can offer not just, as it says, engaging body and mind, bodily, mental, and verbal activities in the transcendental glorification of the Lord. Everything that of which we do should be offerable to the Lord, from our thoughts to our activities, our speech, this vacho vegam, manasaf krodha vegam, jiva vegam, mudara prastha vegam, etan vegan yo vishaheta dira, sarvam apimam prativimsa shishat. The control of the tongue, essentially, the power of speech. If we're not speaking Krishna Katha, if we're not speaking glorification of the spiritual master of the Lord, one will be forced to just engage in prajalpa. I mean, so that has to be there. Going back, if you will, let me see. So I should have had this all better organized. So also, I guess one last point I wanted to touch on. It reads in the purport, the existence of the soul, of the conditioned soul, can be purified only by the method of engaging mind and speech in the service of the Lord. The Tridandi Sannyasi of the Vaishnava school accepts 3 rods representing the vow to engage in the service of the Lord with body, mind, and speech, whereas the Ekadandi Sannyasi takes the vow to become one with the Supreme. Since the Lord is absolute, there is no distinction between him and his glory. So Krishna is ultimately, he's so merciful that even if one has this desire to merge into the Brahmajyoti, he'll essentially fulfill that desire alike. And if one has the desire to ultimately serve him eternally, he'll also give them facilities to do that. So Krishna's mercy is truly unfathomable, if you will. And one should still understand that while Krishna is inconceivably merciful, that mercy should not be taken advantage of in order to essentially facilitate one's sense gratification, as happens with, like we were saying, you could say Protestant Christians, I'll say like specifically, like in fact, and then just other people in general who might have some conception of God that they just kind of like speculate on. That I'll live my life how I want to, and then at the end, God will forgive me anyways. We're all going to heaven. And unfortunately, we even see this in our own movement with, this kind of Haribol, everything's okay, we're all going to Goloka Vrindavan. And to hell with rules and regulations. I mean, I can can just chant Hare Krishna and ultimately everything will be taken care of. I mean, but this is offense to the holy name. We just repeated it this morning. It's Dharma Vrata? No, it's Namno Balad Yaseha Papa Vutir Navidyate Tasya Yamara Hishutihi. So this offense to the holy name is like this offensive mentality. Essentially just to think that Krishna will provide, I don't have to do anything. And ultimately what Krishna will provide. So that faith should be there, but this it's incredibly insincere to just think that without trying to cultivate any sort of detachment from material energy, just go on and enjoy, nicely and be free from our suffering. So one has to understand that we have to dedicate, as it says, body, mind, and speech in the service of the Lord, and not just as a means to get free from suffering, but as our internal engagement, if you will. So, because this is the highest thing. So I really don't have much else. I know I'm not supposed to end so early, but I don't want to start speculating up here. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up for questions if anybody has any.
I was hearing a class with Srila Prabhupada this morning, and Srila Prabhupada was making the point that Krishna provides for everything, and it's a very interesting example. Srila Prabhupada was saying at that time, Srila Prabhupada was saying, well, in India, rice was for 82 or 84 pounds. He said 82, 84, 86, something like this. Pounds of best quality rice. Prabhupada said they could buy it for 5 rupees. 4 or 5 rupees. And he said that translated to about 75 cents. And he was asking the audience, can you imagine? 75 cents. 82 or 86 pounds of first class rice. And then he said, but then the war broke out. And before the war, they had this famine and all this. It was artificially created. And he said immediately the price of the rice shot up to $10. From 75 cents to $10. Then he asked again, can you imagine? 75 cents to $10. So everybody was starving, dying. There was famine. And he said, but I also had to buy rice, for my family. We had to buy. But I asked everybody who I knew, who was even somewhat connected to the devotional line. Prabhupada used that word, even somewhat connected to the devotional line. He said, and I was very happy to hear that all of them were also being provided. They were all able to purchase rice. And so Prabhupada is making this point that a devotee, Krishna provides. Krishna will take care of a devotee. Actually, if we think about it, that kind of inflation is nuts. 10 times. Yeah. The price of rice goes up 10 times. We can't imagine. 10 times is, what is it? I think now, I don't know, Jiddu Girish might know, is a 25 pound bag of rice is what, $36, $35 to $40? You don't know? Oh. You should know. So something like that, It's I at least when I was buying, which was about 3 years ago almost, it was around that price. And then if you think of the 10 times, that's $300. That's crazy. Yeah. How can you afford it? So, but Prabhupada said all the devotees he knew, they were able to afford such a inflated price. So yeah, it's just a comment.
Krishna always provide.
It's quite interesting in this in this commentary they told, Prabhupada told, if when the influence of intoxication is over, like at the end, and the consciousness has come back, like it's mean before you like did all your activity unconsciously, and you can see like we have like 4 regulative principles. Like even you can lose the consciousness not only because of intoxication. You can lose their consciousness because of opposite sex, for example. Sometimes people they're doing so many crazy things, even like unconsciously. And they, what are you doing? What happened? And only after some time you can understand what you did, or you can become like a crazy completely because of money or your position. Like Guru Maharaj gave like class about leaders and fall downs. He told that the people who have a, like a possession, like have a good position, and they become like some like leaders. They became crazy and they became intoxicated. You know, they cannot control the senses. But for me, like most like crazy things, like you cannot judge that person who don't have like consciousness in that moment. It's been like sometimes criminals, like some people, they make some crime, they kill someone, and they some expertise, like some like doctors, they told, oh, he was like an affect because of intoxication or because of something. He don't have a consciousness, like he has consciousness, and that moment because of that we cannot judge him. Like,
Yeah,
it's amazing, you know. Really, for me, it's like really he like did this intoxication like consciously. He's like understanding. He takes this intoxication, and then you cannot judge him because of like, and he's like unconsciously. Then because the solution also is here, like be in Krishna consciousness. If you like in Krishna consciousness, you can control all these things, like not you like directly, but through Krishna, like everything is control. And because of that, we have all these 4 regulative principles. You can see this. Otherwise, you cannot stay in consciousness. You can lose your consciousness because of gambling. Also, you can see in casino people they playing in casino. They are playing unconsciously. They cannot understand what is going on. Even they don't have clocks on the walls. They don't know what is time is it. They don't have windows. They don't know what is now is day or night. You know, and they like a zombie. They cannot control their senses, like unconscious gambling, sex, intoxication, meat eating, or of course like also they take so much sin, and sometimes you become like animal also. This is amazing. Like this really cool. When you lose your consciousness easily.
The one thing that also makes me think of is people who like, they'll like commit like a crime, like a mass shooting, and then when they go to the trial, they play the essentially, oh well, this person's not mentally intact. They're not all there, and so they'll be like putting on like a whole show, like they're like drooling or like staring at the ground or something. It's like there's nothing like it's like come on, like this dude is like they were conscious like of like the crime they committed essentially, but when it comes time to actually like atone for it, they essentially can play this card, and so many people actually get away with it too. It's pretty crazy actually.
It's, in Sweden, like one first famous guy, he killed maybe hundreds and hundreds of people in the island. All tourists came to this island, and he have a rifle, and he sit in one place, and he killed like one by one, and they ask him like why you did this. He told this is not my fault. It is the fault of government, because this is all these immigrants came to our country, and I don't like to see them, like they came from another country, and because of that my anger became increasing. It's not my fault, it's your fault. And in Sweden you can see this is very famous. This is a very famous situation when the people who make the crime, they thinking that this is not their fault. This is the fault of society. In some extent, is like this is like some truth is there, because like Prabhupada told, when women can dress some some clothes without no. It's like yes, open they have features of somebody, and of course the people want to rape him. No, if you're going like a midnight outside and without without dress, it means like somebody can rape you. No, well, it means why you doing like this? Some extent is here, but this is like this.
You're just kind of speaking about since this is a little bit speaking about purification of consciousness, and you're mentioning in the when you go to casinos, you can't hear. When you go to casinos and stuff, you kind of lose a sense of time and all of that. And I don't know how many devotees have that experience when you come to Krishna consciousness. Sometimes you speak to certain devotees, and it's like hours and hours and hours have gone by, and you don't even recognize it. And it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's like they've just been like preaching to you for like hours. You just completely lose track of time, and because there's like that satam prasangam mama vidya samvidya, that kind of verse comes, but we get to experience that in those first few days, like few months of devotional service. You kind of get that, and after a while you kind of becomes like, oh, gotta fall asleep in the Bhagavatam class. But there's also that experience within, like when you come to Krishna consciousness, you hear devotees speak, it's like, wow, this is something that I've never heard before, and it's very enlivening, and you kind of lose track of that. It's like that original consciousness is awakening. I was kind of thinking about that when you said about the casinos and how they take away the sense of time. And like similarly, when you're absorbed in like hearing from devotees. And book distribution, yeah, sometimes, yeah. Completely, you're focused on distributing a number of books, and it's already like 8 o'clock at night, and you're trying to go till you're still going. I had that experience in Gatlinburg also. It's cold, it's hard, and your body's suffering, but you kind of forget completely, and then you forget the body, and then you're just going and going and going. And then you realize it's like 9:30 at night, and you've been out here since 10 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, it's like amazing how like you become conscious, but then within Krishna consciousness you become unconscious, because it doesn't matter anymore, because you're absorbed in just devotional service. So like the time, the nature of time is just like because it's eternal. It's just interesting. Yeah.
Definitely.
They don't give this leeway to animals, but they, when they say, oh, crazy people, they act like they're crazy on the whatever, the stand where they stand, the criminal
Like,
stands in something. It's called something in the court.
nobody would know. I don't know.
Yeah. Anyways, the point is that that when an animal goes a little crazy and starts killing people or starts doing things, they kill it. They kill it. They say, oh, this is a danger to society. The same thing, a human being who's mentally deranged, if he claims that he's mentally deranged, then it's more of a reason that you are so dangerous. So it's all this modern law, everything is topsy-turvy, because they all these people fighting for instance, that they want to abolish the death penalty. They're also meat eaters. They don't see anything wrong with that. So all this hypocrisy and contradiction in society, so much contradiction exists in society today. And they can't do anything about it. They're completely caught up within their own misconceptions and dragged into more ignorance. Krishna says all this. Tanaham dushita kruran samsareshu naradaman kripamyaham ashubhan asurishva vayonishu. So mudha janmani. So anyways.
Can I ask, what's the translation on that?
Oh.
I don't know, I'm sorry.
This is also like when they try to judge the person who made this crime, he told, this is not my fault, it's your fault, because I rise up and this is demonic society. From my childhood, you teach me all these demonic things. I learned this, how to take drugs, and even education. Prabhupada gave this interesting example. And then they judge a person who killed another person. He told, what is the problem? See, I learned in school that we are not we are not souls. We are chemical elements. Yeah. And I only transform these chemical elements to another chemical elements. I cut this body for some pieces. And this just means this is chemical elements, and now this is another chemical, another form of chemical elements. Why? What you want from me? You teach me in the school. This is a problem. It is.
Yeah, and when it's like you put it like that in their face, it's like now it's problematic. It's like it's interesting. It is interesting. I guess anything else or chastisements.
I have a chastisement. No, I'm just kidding. Anyways, we have time, so this is kind of off topic, but it's going off of what Vishnu Chitta Prabhu was saying about how modern law is topsy-turvy. And anyways, it's really blowing my mind I've been doing some research on like cows and stuff, and talking to different people that take care of cows, and they see them as their pets. They do, just as they see their dogs, and it's like, you know, they have some loving relationship with the cow, but for some reason they kill and eat their pet.
Yeah.
And it's just so back, if they won't do this with their dog, but for some reason it's in their mind that cows are meant for us to eat, and the dog is not meant for us to eat. So it's just completely backwards. Yeah.
And you ask them too, it's like, if they think that their animals, like if they think their pets have souls, for example, they're just like, no. It's like, no, it's like, I don't know, the conception is completely and totally off.
But then because of that, you see, these people, they suffer so much because of the way they're acting towards animals, by so-called first lovingly treating them, gaining the trust of these animals, and then actually betraying that love and trust and killing them. Then you see the same reaction in their own personal lives.
Yeah.
So much heartbreak, so much depression, so much, divorce, suicide, children being abused, war, yeah, of course. Why? Because this is what they're doing. How can you expect, how in your right mind can you righteously think that you deserve, a genuine relationship, a genuine form of love that isn't exploitative or hypocritical? When you exploit and are a hypocrite to those who are dependent on you, it's very, 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 very bad. It's very bad. And such people therefore suffer a lot. They suffer a lot, and you can see that in human societies, is suffering like anything. And still they won't learn.
Yeah.
Still they won't learn. I just came across a South Korean feminist movement, and it's called the 4Bs, and it seems like it's in their language. And I don't remember, but basically they say no sex, no intoxication, no men, and then no something else. So they literally, and it's like this at least the article had two black women who were like, yeah, we want to remove this idea of that women need to have men in their life. Women don't need to have men. We're completely fine without doing any of these things. And we can, and they form like women's circles and this and that. And so there's at least the example of that. Some 30-year-old woman is like, I've been celibate since the age of 20 and I'm okay, And they just come up with all these weird solutions to their stupid problems.
Yeah.
And it's so unnatural. Because she's only 30 and she's done something for 10 years and thinks that whatever happened over the last several thousands or millennia, humans have lived in a certain way, and they've done something for 10 years and figured that everybody else is wrong.
Yeah. It's ultimately.
You are so dumb. It's like.
Yeah, and it seems like every philosopher too. It's like they're the ones who figured it out. We're the ones who are gonna get it right. And it practically doesn't actually work. So, there's a good point. Anything else? I guess from the men. Matajis. Okay. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Bhakta Mason, please.